My name is Liam, and at 22, I've just graduated from college. The diploma sits framed on my desk back at home. But right now, I'm living in that vague in-between phase, waiting for my first real job to start riding out the summer days in a sort of limbo. My hometown is a quiet place, tree-lined streets, small cafes, and the old high school where I used to be a student. I thought I'd never go back there, at least not as a visitor. But here I was, pulling into the school parking lot in my beat-up sedan, ready to help out my best friend, Ryan. And as it turned out, his mother. Ryan was in a bind. He'd accepted an internship overseas with his dad, a business trip he couldn't postpone, and had promised his mom, Miss Harper, that he'd be home to help remove desks, hang new posters, and prepare for the upcoming school year. Then last minute, the international flights were pushed forward. He called me in a panic. "Liam, you're the only one I can count on. Can you swing by tomorrow morning?" That's how I found myself that humid morning heading toward classroom 212. My palms were sweaty as I lifted the key from the ring Ryan had left me. It was slightly surreal. The last time I'd seen Miss Harper, I was 17, fumbling through a poetry essay. Now I was a man again, but she had remained quietly entrenched in that school building, preparing a new generation of kids with the same gentle, patient determination she always had. I pushed open the door and stepped in. She was already there, leaning over a stack of bulletin board supplies, colored push pins, a roll of border trim, bits of student artwork begging to be pinned up. She wore a comfortable blouse and loose slacks, softer, more casual than I remembered in school. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and she had thin reading glasses perched low on her nose. But the thing that hit me first was the maturity in her face, the graceful way she moved, the subtle confidence in her posture. She was still undeniably beautiful, and that caught me off guard. Our eyes met. She pushed her glasses up and offered a small surprised smile. "Liam," she said, her voice mellow, warmer than I anticipated. "You must be Ryan's friend." "That's me," I replied. My voice sounded dry, unfamiliar, even to me. "Hey, Ms. Harper." Immediately, we both laughed, just a small, self-aware laugh, acknowledging that this was not how we'd ever met before. The moment felt somehow new, even though I'd sat in her classroom countless times. "Thank you for coming," she said, stepping aside to let me in. "Ryan said you'd be here." I nodded awkwardly, checking the supplies on the table. "Yeah, he really messed up the timing." "Don't worry," she assured me, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I've got plenty to do, and the more hands the better." She paused, looking at me thoughtfully. "It's nice to see a familiar face around here again." I flushed, grateful for the normal-sounding words. "It's good to be back." We settled into an easy rhythm almost immediately. First, the board needed erasing 5 years' worth of chalk dust to remove, but we worked shoulder to shoulder in the quiet morning. She handed me a damp cloth with a small smile, and I caught myself noticing how the light shifted across her cheekbones, how effortless her movements were. I shook off those thoughts and focused on the job, clearing dust, stacking extra chalk by the shelf, tapping at the lock on the bulletin board cases. She was calm and efficient, moving with a gentle professionalism I hadn't seen in college professors. This was hands-on summer camp-style teaching prep. She passed me the next box of supplies without fuss. We were a team. "Pass me the red border trim," she said, turning around. "Here," I said, handing it over. Our fingers brushed a tiny spark. I startled for a second, then wiped my hand on my jeans like it was nothing. She pretended not to notice. After an hour or so, we took a break. She poured 2 cups of coffee in the faculty lounge down the hall, a narrow room lined with cabinets and second-hand couches. I sipped mine, carefully savoring the strong aroma. "It's nice to have help," she said, leaning back against the counter. "Usually, I do all this by myself." "You're a pro," I said, impressed. "You make it look easy." She smiled in that thoughtful way again. "It's muscle memory at this point. I've done this job for 15 years, but it's still fun when a little extra creativity comes into it." We talked about the new school year, freshman scheduling, quirks, a stack of essays waiting on her desk. When she laughed, soft, precise, It echoed in the small room and made me want to smile. In that moment, sitting in the teacher's lounge on a random summer morning, I realized how different this felt. The relationship had changed. She wasn't my high school English teacher anymore. She was Mrs. Harper, a woman in her 40s with experiences and memories separate from my teenage self. And yet she was still kind, still genuine, still magnetic. Back in the classroom, we continued hanging student work, colorful posters with quotes from literature, little art pieces. I climbed a small step stool to secure a corner of a poster, and she stood behind me, holding the other side. "Careful up there," she said softly, her voice just inches behind my ear. "Got it," I mumbled. The drill in my hand felt heavier than it should. I was suddenly aware of how close she was. I shook off my shaky focus and placed the poster straight. Her breath warmed the room's heat. "Perfect," she said quietly. I turned the screw, applied a thumb-pressed border. We stepped back to admire. She nodded approvingly. "Nice job." I swallowed hard, suddenly conscious of how I looked, how I sounded. She gave me a confident smile, philosophically impressed. The morning wore on. We paused again, leaning on desks, stretching our backs. "How many posters do we need?" I asked. "Just about a dozen," she replied, folding her arms. She tilted her head thoughtfully. "Maybe 3 more across the front. The students will sit in a row." "I can help," I said, scanning the wall. "Thanks," she said, handing me a stack of paper. Then she looked at me, a question in her eyes, no words needed. I nodded. "Set them up." She continued taping and straightening. There was comfort in the silence we shared, productive, easy silence. Occasionally, she'd hum a quiet tune. Occasionally, I'd glance her way, admiring the lines of her face and concentration. At lunchtime, we took a longer break. The sun shifted high overhead, and the school halls felt eerily empty. We sat in the teacher's lounge again. I grabbed a granola bar and a bottle of water. She poured more coffee. "You're doing great," she said again. It wasn't a casual compliment. It had warmth, maybe a hint of something deeper. "Thanks. You make it fun," I answered, and I meant it. She studied me. "You grew up, Liam. I remember when you were shorter." I laughed, shaking my head. "Yeah, and you look the same, but in my mind you were always, in charge." She finished for me softly. "Exactly." Her expression softened. "But look at you now." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes I forget how much time has passed until someone reminds me." I felt my chest tighten. "Listen," she continued, "I really appreciate this go-to guy for a little while." Then she grinned, suddenly playful. "Maybe I'll hire you full-time." I laughed, reached out, tapped her arm. The contact felt electric, though subtle. "Don't push yourself too hard," she cautioned with that irresistible mix of tones. Slightly maternal, slightly flirtatious. I nodded, but for a strange moment, I couldn't look away from her face. The afternoon stretched. We returned to the board to finish the final touches. Seating charts of Shakespeare quote taped to the chalk tray. "We are such stuff as dreams are made on," she said with that soft inflection, naming it like a blessing. When the last piece of tramming was placed, she stepped back, surveyed the room in satisfaction. "It looks ready," I exhaled, feeling pride mixed with an ache I couldn't name. "It does." She gave me that warmer smile again, but then hesitated, meeting my eyes in a longer gaze than before. I wondered what she was thinking if she saw me as I saw her now. Not my teacher, not a friend's mom, but something else. In that charged, quiet space, we were 2 people who had changed, who were seeing each other again. Really seeing each other, not through the past, but through the present. We closed the classroom door and walked out together. The school parking lot lay in the afternoon light, empty of cars except for mine and a few others. We walked side by side, each step echoing on the pavement. "Thanks, Liam," she said softly when we reached my car. "Let me know if you need help tomorrow," I offered. She smiled, maybe a glimmer of something deeper in that smile. "I might." I paused, my heart thumping with surprising awareness. "I'll be here." She looked at me, eyes steady. "I know." As I climbed into my car, I glanced back one last time. She stood there in her casual blouse and glasses watching me. The space between us felt alive, as though something new had begun, though no words were spoken. I drove off the hum of tires on asphalt, carrying me into that uncertain, heady feeling of possibility. Part of me thought, what am I doing? This is weird. Another part thought, this is exactly where I'm supposed to be right now. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. Her hands adjusting the trim, her laugh in the lounge, the way she looked at me when I climbed the stool. I kept telling myself, she's not your teacher anymore. She's a woman who made you feel something. Something you haven't felt in a long time. And tomorrow she'd need me again. The next morning, I returned to the classroom just after 8. The hallways were wide and empty, the late summer sun slanting through high windows. I unlocked the door and pushed in. The room felt familiar and new. At once colorful posters lining the walls, neat desks and rows. And there she was, Ms. Harper, already at work, moving with understated grace, placing old student essays into a file cabinet, humming softly to herself. She wore a soft cardigan over a blouse that hinted at her collarbone. Her hair, with an effortless wave, pulled back loosely, but unraveled around her neck. She looked up, smiled. "Good morning, Liam," she said, handing me a spool of string for hanging decorations. "Morning," I answered, stepping toward her. "You've made a lot of progress since yesterday." She turned, smoothing a poster. "Thanks to you." Her tone was light, but there was something sincere behind it. She paused, then asked, "Anything you've been up to since graduation?" I shrugged, moving to tidy a bundle of scrap paper. "Not much, mostly waiting on job offers." She nodded thoughtfully. "It's a strange time being done with school, but not quite launched." I leaned back, considering, "Yeah, I feel in between." She glanced at me. For a second, I met her eyes, and something unfocused in me caught the look. She turned away, smiled, more like a friend now than the teacher once in charge. We got into the morning's rhythm, hanging student artwork, affixing motivational quotes to bulletin boards, filing stacking supplies. Conversation started casually, then deepened naturally. I asked about her summer, if she'd done anything fun. She sighed quietly, smoothing a ribbon around a poster. "Not really. I've been working part-time grading, tutoring, trying to clear my desk before the fall chaos. Honestly, a lot of it is to keep busy." I paused. "That sounds like a lot." She gave me a distant look. "I got divorced 2 years ago." She didn't say more at first. No bitterness, just a calm statement drifting in the warm classroom air. It's just different, comfortable, but a little lonely. I stopped what I was doing, looked at her. She met my gaze without turning away, but I sensed hesitation in her posture. "I'm sorry," I managed. Her lips curved in a small, rueful smile. "Thank you, but I'm okay. I keep teaching, keep helping students learn, and over the summer I tutor a few kids to stay busy. It helps." We moved on to setting up a reading corner, a cozy space with pillows, a small old couch, and a side table. She placed a stack of classic novels while I adjusted the lamp. She chatted about favorite books, To Kill a Mockingbird, The Great Gatsby, some obscure mid-20th century poetry she loved. I listened, genuinely interested. At one point, she slipped her glasses off, wiped them with a cloth. Her hand lingered by her cheek, and I noticed the curve of her jaw, the gentle line of her neck. She seemed so out of reach, yet close enough to notice every detail. We paused for water after an hour. She poured 2 glasses, leaned against the cabinet, sipping slowly. "Time moves strange in this room," she said. "I've taught here for 15 years, but this time of year, it always feels like both an ending and a beginning." I nodded. "I get that. It's like I'm closing a chapter but haven't opened the next yet." She smiled faintly, looking thoughtful. "Exactly." We drifted into silence. Then she said softly, "Liam." I looked up. "Thank you for being here." I swallowed. "Really? I mean, it's nice to help." The words sounded smaller than I felt. She studied me then, after a moment crossed to where she kept spare bulbs and lighter fixtures. Let's hang those fairy lights above the chalkboard, she said, reaching up to a top shelf. She tugged a chair forward, climbed onto it. I heard a shifting foot, then a soft gasp. She'd lost her footing. Instinctively, I stepped forward, wrapped an arm around her waist, steadying her from behind. My chest pressed lightly against her back. For a heartbeat, we froze. The room tensed, her breathing paused. I lowered her gently, guiding her down carefully. Her hand touched my forearm during that motion. I felt the warmth of her skin. I stepped back automatically, throat dry. She stood up straight, brushing imaginary dust from her jeans. I stood rigid, processing what had happened. It was only a second, not intimate in intention, but intimate in contact, and neither of us pulled away quickly. We both seemed to register it. She cleared her throat. Thanks, she said quietly. Careful up there next time. I nodded, still dazed. Of course, sorry. She smiled, crooked and soft, then turned to replace the light fixture. But I felt something unspoken stretch between us, hovering for the rest of the afternoon. We resumed work in uneasy silence, but gradually the tension melted. We tackled the seating plan chart chalk lines, neat under her guidance. She stood beside me as I wrote columns on craft paper symbols, neat and precise. She leaned close to peer and I smelled her perfume, mild, slightly floral fresh. That scent settled in me, lingering. My heart thudded. She cleared her throat again. I sometimes forget I knew some of these students' parents, she said quietly. It's surprising how things change. I glanced at her. Yeah, me too. Especially when I bump into old friends in town who were freshmen when I was a senior. She nodded. I remember teaching you in junior year. You were, say, kind of irony in your essays. I chuckled quietly. That's what I got marks for. She looked fond. You always leaned into a story-making voice. I wonder. I hope you keep writing. I felt a pang. I planned to maybe after graduation I'll do freelance writing until something else starts. She studied me then. You should. Her encouragement felt meaningful. I tried not to grin too wide. We wrapped up around lunch. She gathered leftover supplies into bins while I stacked textbooks. We shared a few more laughs, lighthearted about misplaced scissors and markers. The odd poster that wouldn't hang straight. In that routine laughter and easy atmosphere, I realized how few people I'd felt that comfortable with lately. At the end, she stepped back, surveyed the room desks in perfect alignment. Posters up, fairy lights neatly strung, student work bright and inviting. It's ready, she said again. Her voice held something more than satisfaction, maybe pride, maybe connection. I smiled, looking at the transformation. Yeah. She turned to me suddenly, closing the distance. Liam, she said softly, pausing as if choosing words. I haven't had a conversation like this in a long time. I felt something tighten in my chest. Thank you, she offered a genuine smile, then placed a printed poem, the same one she'd used with freshman classes, into my hand. Keep writing, and if you ever want to talk, I'll be here. I bowed my head slightly, taking the sheet. We stood like that for a while. Then, without warning, she pressed the paper into my palm and turned to collect her bag. As I packed away, I caught myself remembering this was no longer student-teacher. This was adult to adult. Somewhere in that exchange lay a fragile shift, something blurred yet unspoken. That evening I went home, opened the poem, a short piece about seasons changing, time passing. I read and reread it, her handwriting neat, but what struck me more were the emotions attached. I lay on my bed, mind drifting, recalling her laugh, a tilt of her head, how I'd studied her, the way she looked at me when she mentioned loneliness, the warmth of her perfume. I felt something unfamiliar in my chest, trust, fascination, longing. Whatever it was, I couldn't ignore it. That night I texted Ryan. Hey man, your mom's amazing. That classroom's coming out great. He replied instantly with a thumbs up emoji. Glad you're helping. Mom loves having you around. Then he added, don't make her coffee too often. I burrowed under the covers, stared at the ceiling. A tiny smile threatened. A thrill pulsed through me. My head spun with thoughts. She's divorced. She feels lonely. I felt something when I steadied her on that chair. Does she feel it too? And even if she did, what does that mean? I tried pushing the doubt away, reminded myself it was just a moment, a necessary precaution when she lost balance. Nothing more. But those moments lingered like her perfume on my clothes. The next day, everything just felt different. The next few days, I found myself returning to Miss Harper's classroom. Though most of the work was nearly finished, I told myself I wanted to help ensure everything was perfect. But part of me suspected another reason I liked being there. The morning air buzzed with that familiar schoolhouse scent, chalk dust, old textbooks, polished floors, and she was always there greeting me with that warm, knowing smile. On what I thought would be the final morning, I pushed through the classroom door. She was arranging a final row of chairs. "Morning, Liam," she said, her eyes holding warmth and something else, a softness that felt meaningful. "Good morning, Miss Harper," I replied. "Looks like you're almost done." She turned, tilting her head teasingly. "You've done more than your share," she replied, then paused, arching an eyebrow. "I think you didn't really come here just to help, did you?" That was the first time I heard her voice carry a subtle, seductive undertone. Playful, direct, unafraid. It made me catch my breath. I offered a weak grin, afraid of what I'd say. "Maybe I wanted to see you again." I managed voice unexpectedly low. Her expression softened and she laughed. Not the polite school teacher laugh, but freer, more personal. She set down a stack of paper, approached me slowly. "I'm glad you did." Then, as if on cue, clouds gathered outside. Within minutes, raindrops struck the window, big splashes creating rhythmic patterns on the glass. The sky darkened. Rain pounded the pavement. Thunder rolled faintly, and I realized my motorbike was parked outside vulnerable. "I don't want you riding in this," she said, frowning with concern. I started to stand, but she shook her head. "Stay here. The safer," she insisted. "I'll get you something dry to wear." I watched her walk to a closet in the corner, reaching for a large shirt. She handed it to me, oversized soft cotton smelling faintly of lavender detergent. As she draped it over my shoulders, pulling at clothes at the front, I joked breathlessly, "It won't fit." She laughed, careful and sweet. "It's not meant to. At least your shirt won't be soaked." I offered to help clear up, but she waved me off. "Let's sit, have dinner," she said, ushering me to a corner table. She'd already prepared 2 simple sandwiches wrapped in parchment, set out 2 steaming mugs of tea. Sitting across from her felt strange but comforting, like being in 2 worlds at once. A classroom tied to teenage memories and a cozy intimacy I'd never imagined here. The rain drummed overhead, muffled by the roof. We ate in quiet companionship, at first savoring the warmth of tea, the softness of fresh bread. Then she asked about my summer plans, laughed gently at something I said. I looked up, caught her smiling expectantly. That moment was electric. I swallowed my sandwich, lifted my cup, met her gaze. "I have to admit," she began, a voice soft through the steam, "I enjoy this more than I've enjoyed decorating in years." She paused, looked at me. "It's nice to have company that's not just volunteer labor." My heart thumped loud enough I worried she'd hear it. "I feel the same," I said quietly. She turned, studied me. My fingers drummed restlessly on the mug. The rain's tempo inside synced with my pulse. I glanced at the tablecloth's floral print, softening the harsh chalkboard backdrop. Then, as if drawn by gravity, I leaned forward spontaneously. A bead of rain dripped from her hairline onto her forehead. I reached out with a napkin, gently wiped the drop away. My palm brushed her skin, fingers catching the slightest sheen of rain on her brow. She didn't flinch or pull away. She looked up at me, eyes nearly level with mine, steady, intimate, though she remained seated. "Thank you, Liam," she whispered. I froze, words caught. The silence expanded, the air charged. She kept looking. No awkwardness, just acceptance. I leaned back, chest tightening. She sipped her tea, turned the conversation outward, asking about my dream job again. But something had shifted. Dinner continued. Sandwiches, tea, small laughter. but neither of us ignored the quiet current humming between us. Not bold, not physical, but full of warmth and familiarity. I'd never felt with her before. When thunder rumbled overhead, she paused mid-laugh, watching me with a slight tilt of her head. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Better than okay." She smiled quietly. "Good." The rain slowed but fell steadily, drumming at the window panes. We finished dinner in companionable silence. She collected the plates, murmuring about washing up tomorrow. I offered to help, but she declined with a small, knowing look, content to let the moment rest. I noticed how her blouse clung faintly at her shoulder's curve, how her hair curled softly around her neck, how the overhead light gave a golden glow to her eyes. I felt the damp cotton of her shirt still draped over me, smelling comforting. Finally, she stood, brushed crumbs off the table. "The storm's passing," she said. "You should probably stay until it clears completely." I nodded. She smiled. I lingered as she moved to close the curtains. Then we stood beside the chalkboard, looking out at rain-slicked pavement glinting under street lamps. "Thanks for staying," she whispered. "Any time," I replied, voice quiet. Another pause. Without thinking, I reached out, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. She turned her head slightly into my hand. For a heartbeat, we stood still, our breaths mingling. But the moment lingered only a moment. She pressed her lips together, gently stepped back. It was respectful, subtle, true. I took a breath full of something unspoken. Somewhere between that dinner and stepping outside, the rain stopped. I stepped into an aftertorm. World-wet streets, cool air, curiosity humming inside. I held on to the oversized shirt as I walked to my bike. She followed a few steps out, called softly, "Be careful going home." I nodded curtly, feeling oddly shy. "Text me tomorrow," she added. "I will," I said. I swung onto the bike, glancing back at her silhouette in the doorway under the amber hallway light. I didn't ride off immediately. I sat on the leather seat, engine off, thinking over everything. What was I doing feeling like this about her, a friend's mom, my former English teacher? Yet there wasn't a trace of student-teacher dynamic anymore. Something else had shifted quietly, but it mattered more than I expected. When I rode away, the damp summer air clung to me. My heart still pounded my mind, heavy but alive. I felt tethered to something new, gentle, and electric both. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, replaying every second the brush of her hair, the droplet on her forehead, her voice saying she enjoyed my company, the playfulness, concern, warmth. I asked myself, what am I doing? What am I allowing myself to feel? Yet, a small voice whispered, "Felt right." When I drifted off, sleep came heavy and slow, weighed down by possibility. But there was comfort in that uncertainty. The day after the storm, I stayed away from the school. I told myself it was to give her space, that we both needed a moment to think clearly. But truthfully, I was confused. Not in a dramatic movie way, but in the slow sinking way when the ground shifts beneath your feet and you're still deciding if you like how it feels. I couldn't stop thinking about her. Everything about that night, her laugh during dinner, the softness in her eyes, the way she let me wipe rain from her forehead, played over in my mind. Not just the physical things, but how she looked at me like I mattered, like she saw more than Ryan's friend or a former student. It made my chest ache, warm, unfamiliar, a little dangerous, because it was crossing a line, wasn't it? I told myself not to feel this way. I told myself it was just the storm, the intimacy of shared quiet, warm tea-dim lights. But my body knew something else. It wasn't just the moment. It was her. 2 days passed before I returned. I waited until the end of the school day, when the halls were empty and the summer light softened into gold. I didn't text or call. I just walked in, heart thudding like it was my first day back in high school. Miss Harper was at her desk grading summer assignments. She looked up when I entered, smiled, quieter, warmer, maybe more aware. "Hi," I said. "Hi, Liam." She set her pen down. "You didn't come yesterday." I nodded. I needed time to think. She studied me, then gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit." I did. For a moment, Neither of us spoke. The classroom was dim sun filtering through blinds, her desk light casting soft shadows across her face. I felt like a kid again, nervous, unsure. But I wasn't a kid. That was the point, wasn't it? I've been trying to figure out how to say this. I began, voice low, hands clasped in my lap. And I might mess it up, but I don't want to pretend I'm not feeling what I'm feeling. She didn't interrupt, just nodded slightly. I keep thinking about the other night I continued, how you looked at me, how I looked at you, and I don't want to cross a line or ruin the respect I've always had for you. But I also can't act like I don't feel something between us. When I looked up, her expression had shifted. Not shocked, not surprised, just thoughtful, moved. She took a slow breath, leaned forward, resting her arms on the desk. You haven't ruined anything, she said quietly. I've been thinking about it too. I waited. My heart felt like it had crawled into my throat. You're right, she continued. There is something here. And yes, I've tried to convince myself it's nothing. A moment, a season, but it's not. I swallowed. She smiled faintly. You're not my student anymore, and I'm not just a friend's mom. You've grown into someone I enjoy being around, someone who makes me laugh, who makes me feel seen. Her words hung in the air. She added, voice softening. I've been alone a long time, Liam. There was something so real in how she said it. No sadness, no self-pity, just honesty. It resonated through me. I stood slowly, walked around the desk. She didn't move. I crouched beside her chair, and for a moment we just looked at each other. I don't know what this is, I said, voice barely a whisper, but I don't want to lie to myself anymore. Her hand moved first slightly. I reached for it. Our fingers touched, slid into each other. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. We sat like that, hands together, knees nearly touching, in the silence of an empty classroom where I used to learn about metaphors, Shakespeare's sentence structure. Now it was where I learned something more complicated. There was no kiss, no cinematic moment, just the steady hum of connection. Two people navigating the space between what's allowed and what's real. Eventually, she squeezed my hand, smiled. Thank you for saying it, she whispered. I nodded, afraid to speak. I didn't trust my voice not to tremble. We stayed like that for a long while, talking about nothing and everything. How students had changed over the years. Books we both love, loneliness, and how it settles differently for different people. I thought I was past the point of this, she said at one point, of feeling this kind of spark. I smiled, brushing my thumb gently across her knuckles. So did I. When I left that afternoon, the sky was pale lavender, the parking lot still, the air smelling of dry grass and chalk dust. I stood beside my bike, feeling the soft burn of her touch, still clinging to my skin. She walked me out but didn't say much, just placed her hand lightly on my arm, looked at me in that way again, like we shared something quiet and important. Will I see you tomorrow? She asked. If you want to, I said. I do, she answered, and that was enough. That night I didn't feel confused anymore. I didn't have answers, didn't know what came next. But I knew this wasn't fantasy or projection. It wasn't about chasing someone older or her missing someone younger. It was about us. Two people drawn together, not by accident, but by something real, not rushed, something earned. Even though I hadn't kissed her, hadn't pulled her into anything reckless or fast I didn't need to, that moment by her desk, her fingers curled gently in mine, had said more than any kiss could. For now, that was enough. I kept coming back, not for bulletin boards or poster trimming, not for checklists or tidy stacks of student folders, but for her Harper Sophia, as I'd started to say in my mind, though never aloud. She welcomed me each time in the same quiet, calm way, but something had shifted between us. Not loud or dramatic, but soft, steady, present. She no longer handed me a to-do list. Instead, we simply spent time. One afternoon, I found her barefoot sitting on a pillow in the reading nook we'd created together. A worn copy of the bell jar in her lap corners, bent and fragile. She glanced up when I walked in, smiled, patted the spot beside her. I kicked off my shoes, joined her on the floor, sinking into the plush carpet. No small talk this time. She opened the book. Read aloud. Her voice low, rhythmic. I closed my eyes as she read. It wasn't about the words, but the way she brought them to life. I listened relaxed, letting the cadence fill the space between us. When she paused, I opened my eyes. She was watching me. I used to read this to my students, she said softly, but it felt too heavy for most of them. They didn't understand it yet. And me? I asked. She smiled, placing the book down. You always read between the lines. We stayed there for hours trading books and stories. She told me about the first time she taught, how nervous she'd been. I told her about my first crush. She laughed with genuine warmth. She shared how quiet the house had become since Ryan left for college. I admitted I was afraid of doing nothing meaningful after graduation. At one point, laughing at a line about a disastrous school field trip, she reached out, placed her hand on my shoulder. Her fingers rested there longer than necessary. I turned slightly, placed my hand on hers. Neither of us said anything. We didn't need to. That simple touch, her fingers on my shoulder, hanging on her hand, was enough to ground everything. It wasn't a confession, wasn't a promise, but an acknowledgement. Quiet, present, real. Ryan came home a few days later. I knew it had to happen eventually. The internship ended early. He texted me that morning, landing at noon. Back at the house by 31 to hang out later. I sat in the faculty lounge with Sophia, Ms. Harper, staring at my phone. She was pouring coffee. I wasn't sure what to say. He's coming back, I said. She looked up. She already knew, of course. No surprise in her eyes, just a soft smile. I'm glad, she said. You should see him. I nodded, staring at the steam rising from my mug. Things will be different. She walked over, sat beside me. They already are. She didn't reach for my hand. Didn't move closer. But her presence was solid. Grounded. That was her way. Not dramatic, not needy, just there. When Ryan and I met later that evening, we fell back into old rhythms, easily grabbed burgers, talked about dumb movies, joked about old classmates. He mentioned how grateful his mom was, that I'd helped with the classroom. She said you were a lifesaver. He grinned. I smiled back. She's kind. He didn't press, didn't suspect anything. Why would he? Nothing had technically happened. No cross lines, no scandal, just time, just connection. But I felt different. And I think in some way he sensed that. I didn't go back to the classroom right away. I gave it a few days. But eventually, on a quiet afternoon, I returned. The front doors were unlocked. Teachers were preparing for the fall. I found her at her desk typing lesson plans. When she saw me, she smiled. Not the smile of someone's surprise, but of someone who'd been waiting. I stepped inside, leaned against the doorframe. Hi, I said. Hi, she replied. Nothing more needed to be said. I walked over. She stood. We sat together on the floor again, this time without books. Just us in the late summer quiet of a school not yet filled with students. I miss this, I said quietly. She nodded. Me too. I turned toward her. I don't know what happens next. She looked at me, her expression unreadable but not cold. Neither do I. And there it was. Honesty the purest kind. She reached out, took my hand. This time I held hers firmly. There was no kiss, no confessions, just the weight of her fingers wrapped around mine, the slight tremble passing between us. When I left that afternoon, something felt different in the air. I heard the faint creak of lockers down the hall, the distant hum of someone vacuuming in the admin office. School was waking up again, life pressing forward. Still, I paused in the hallway just outside her classroom, turned back. She stood by the door, arms crossed, watching me. She didn't wave, didn't speak. But the way she looked at me, that look was enough. It said everything that something had begun here. Quietly, slowly, maybe in the wrong place, maybe at the wrong time, but undeniably real. When I got home, I wrote for the first time in months. Not an essay, not a job application, but a page, then another. I wrote about her. Not directly, not obviously, but about the feeling, the quiet moments, the warmth in her voice, how rain changes light in a classroom, how someone can sit beside you, say nothing, and change everything. I didn't know if I'd ever show it to her, but I wrote. Liam's story with Sophia, his former teacher and best friend's mom, reveals a profound lesson. True connection often emerges in unexpected places, but it requires courage to acknowledge and restraint to honor boundaries. Helping Sophia prepare her classroom, Liam rediscovered her not as Miss Harper, the teacher, but as a woman with depth, grace, and quiet loneliness. Their shared moments, hanging posters, sipping coffee, a fleeting touch during a near fall, sparked an undeniable bond charged with warmth and unspoken longing. Yet Sophia's gentle insistence on respecting their roles despite mutual feelings teaches us that love sometimes means prioritizing others' well-being over personal desire. Liam's choice to embrace this connection without crossing forbidden lines shows maturity, proving that growth comes from navigating complex emotions with honesty and care. Their story, filled with quiet glances and tender silences, reminds us that life's most meaningful relationships don't always need to be defined or consummated to leave a lasting impact. They can transform us simply by existing. Have you ever felt a connection that changed you, even if it remained unspoken? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how you found meaning in life's delicate moments. If this tale stirred your heart, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell to join our community. Your support keeps these stories of quiet courage and emotional truth alive. Let's keep exploring life's complexities together.